The stagecoach lurched to a stop in Canon City, Colorado, and Delilah Porter pressed her gloved hand against the dusty window, wondering if she had made the worst mistake of her life agreeing to marry a man she had never met. It was April 1878, and the journey from Philadelphia had taken nearly 2 weeks of bone-rattling discomfort across prairies and mountains. Her entire life had been packed into 2 worn trunks strapped to the back of this coach, and somewhere in this rough frontier town waited Samuel Morgan, the man who had paid her passage and written her precisely 3 letters about his ranch, his prospects, and his need for a wife to help him build a future in Colorado territory. The door swung open, and Delilah gathered her dark green traveling dress, stepping down onto the wooden sidewalk. Canon City stretched before her, a collection of wooden buildings and dirt streets nestled against the dramatic backdrop of the Rocky Mountains. The April air carried the sharp scent of pine and the earthier smell of horses and cattle. Miss Porter, a weathered man with a star pinned to his vest, approached her. "I am Sheriff Daniels. Samuel Morgan sent word for me to meet you and bring you out to the ranch." Delilah's stomach tightened. Samuel himself could not come. The sheriff removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. "Well, miss, that is a complicated matter. Perhaps we should get your luggage loaded and I can explain on the way." 20 minutes later, Delilah sat beside Sheriff Daniels in a sturdy wagon, her trunks secured in the back. The town fell away behind them as they headed into rolling countryside dotted with scrub oak and pine. "Samuel Morgan died 3 weeks ago," the sheriff said finally, his voice matter of fact but not unkind. "Kicked by a horse. It was quick, if that is any comfort." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Delilah gripped the wagon seat, her knuckles white beneath her gloves. "He is dead." "Then why am I here? Why did no one send word?" "His brother Blake wanted to write to you, but Samuel had already paid your passage, and by the time the funeral was done and Blake could get to town to send a telegram, well, you were already on your way." Blake figured the least he could do was explain in person and offer to pay your way back east if that is what you want. Delilah sat in stunned silence as the wagon rolled on. Everything she had left behind in Philadelphia, her position as a seamstress in her aunt's shop, the tiny room she had rented, even the tentative courtship with the butcher's son that had gone nowhere, all of it was gone. She had burned those bridges in her letters of goodbye, announcing her engagement and impending marriage with perhaps more confidence than she had actually felt. "What kind of man is this Blake Morgan?" she asked finally. The sheriff was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Blake is a good man. He is younger than Samuel was, maybe 27 or 28. He has been working the ranch with his brother for 5 years now. Quiet fellow, keeps to himself mostly, but honest and hardworking. Samuel was more the businessman, but Blake knows cattle and horses better than anyone in the county." The ranch appeared as they crested a low hill. It was more substantial than Delilah had expected. A sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch, a large barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grassland. A man emerged from the barn as they approached. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days outdoors. He wore worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. As the wagon drew closer, Delilah could see his face was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and eyes the color of a summer sky. Blake Morgan removed his hat as Sheriff Daniels brought the wagon to a stop. "Miss Porter," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough. "I am terribly sorry about the circumstances. This is not how anyone wanted this to go." Delilah allowed him to help her down from the wagon. His hand was warm and calloused, strong but gentle. Sheriff Daniels explained the situation. "I am sorry for your loss, Mr. Morgan." Samuel wrote kindly in his letters. "He was looking forward to your arrival," Blake said. There was genuine sadness in his eyes. He had been fixing up the house, making plans. They stood awkwardly for a moment before the sheriff cleared his throat. "I will leave you two to talk. Miss Porter, if you need anything, you send word to town." As the sheriff drove away, Delilah found herself alone with this stranger in the middle of the Colorado wilderness. Blake seemed equally uncertain, turning his hat in his hands. "You must be tired and hungry," he said finally. "Let me get your trunks inside, and I will fix something to eat. The house is not as organized as it could be." Samuel was the one who kept things neat. The interior of the house was indeed somewhat disheveled, but it was solidly built and more spacious than Delilah had expected. The main room featured a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and windows that let in the afternoon light. A kitchen area occupied one corner, and stairs led to the second floor. Blake carried her trunks upstairs to a bedroom that had clearly been prepared for a woman. Curtains hung at the windows, and a colorful quilt covered the bed. "Samuel ordered that quilt from a lady in town," Blake said quietly. "He wanted everything to be nice for you." Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes. She had not loved Samuel Morgan, had not even known him, but the evidence of his hopeful preparations touched something deep inside her. "I will give you some time to freshen up," Blake said, backing toward the door. "There is water in the pitcher. Come down when you are ready." Alone in the room, Delilah sank onto the bed and tried to gather her scattered thoughts. She was 23 years old, unmarried, and stranded on a cattle ranch in Colorado with a man she had just met. She had no money for passage back east, no job waiting for her, no family who would welcome her return with anything but "I told you so" glances. She washed her face and hands, unpinned her dark blonde hair and recoiled it, and changed from her traveling dress into a simpler brown skirt and cream blouse. When she descended the stairs, she found Blake at the stove, stirring something in a pot. "It is just stew," he said apologetically. "I am not much of a cook, but it is hot and filling." They ate at the wooden table, the silence broken only by the clink of spoons against bowls. Finally, Blake pushed his bowl aside and met her eyes. "I have been thinking about your situation," he said. "You came all this way expecting to marry Samuel and make a life here. That plan is gone now, but you should not be left with nothing. The ranch is mine now, along with everything Samuel had. I would like to offer you two choices." Delilah set down her spoon, listening intently. "First choice, I will give you enough money to return to Philadelphia and have something to start over with there. It is only fair, given what happened. And the second choice," Blake took a deep breath, "you could stay here as Samuel planned, marry me instead." The words hung in the air between them. Delilah stared at him, not sure she had heard correctly. "You are asking me to marry you. We just met." "I know how it sounds," Blake said, his voice earnest, "but think about it practically. You came here to marry a stranger and make a home on a ranch. That option is still available, just with a different brother. The ranch is doing well. You would have security, a home, a future." "But we do not know each other at all," Delilah protested. "You do not know anything about me, and I certainly do not know you." "That is true," Blake acknowledged. "And I am not asking you to decide right now. Stay here for a while. Get to know the place. Get to know me. If after a month or two you decide you want to go back east, I will pay your passage with no hard feelings. But if you think you could make a life here, well, the offer stands." "And if I stay without marrying you, what would people say?" Blake frowned thoughtfully. "I have a friend who lives about 2 miles down the valley, widow named Martha Henley. She is a good woman in her 60s and her health is not the best. I have been helping her with heavy work around her place. Maybe you could stay with her, help her out, and come here during the days to see the ranch. That way everything would be proper. It was more consideration than Delilah had expected. She studied Blake Morgan in the fading afternoon light. He seemed sincere, his expression open and honest. There was none of the pushy insistence she had feared, no attempt to take advantage of her vulnerable position. "Why would you want to marry me?" she asked. "Surely there are women in town who know you, who would be glad of an offer from a ranch owner." A slight color rose in Blake's weathered cheeks. Samuel was right about needing a wife to build this place into something more than just a bachelor ranch. "I am 28 years old, and I have spent the last 5 years working from dawn to dusk with little thought to anything else. Truth is, I am not good at courting and talking to women." The idea of a mail-order bride made sense to Samuel, and I suppose it makes sense to me too. "That is honest, at least," Delilah said. She appreciated his straightforward manner, even if the situation was bizarre. "I will take you to Mrs. Henley's place in the morning," Blake said. "For tonight, you take the bedroom upstairs and I will sleep down here on the couch. Tomorrow you can start figuring out what you want to do." That night, Delilah lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowed in the distance, and the wind whispered through the pines. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the carefully chosen quilt that Samuel Morgan had bought for his mail-order bride. She thought about Blake Morgan's offer. It was mad, certainly, but no madder than her original plan to marry Samuel. At least Blake was giving her choices, time to decide. There was something appealing about his quiet strength, his honesty. And the ranch itself had a wild beauty that called to something adventurous in her soul that she had not known existed. Morning came with golden sunlight and the sound of Blake moving around downstairs. Delilah dressed quickly and found him making coffee on the stove. "There is bread and butter," he said, "and eggs if you want them." "Bread is fine," Delilah said. She poured herself coffee from the battered pot, adding a bit of sugar from a tin on the shelf. After breakfast, Blake hitched up the wagon again, and they drove down the valley to Martha Henley's place. It was a small homestead, neat but showing signs of neglect that came from an owner who could no longer keep up with all the work. Martha herself was a tiny woman with white hair and bright, intelligent eyes. She listened to the story with obvious sympathy and immediately agreed to take Delilah in. "Of course you will stay here, dear," she said, patting Delilah's hand with her gnarled fingers. "And do not pay any mind to wagging tongues in town. Blake Morgan is a good man, and his brother Samuel was the same. This is a strange situation, but life on the frontier is strange sometimes. We make do with what we are given." Over the following days, Delilah settled into an unexpected routine. She helped Martha with cooking and cleaning, mended clothes, and tended the small vegetable garden. In the afternoons, Blake would often stop by, sometimes bringing supplies, sometimes just checking on Martha's fences or chopping wood. He and Delilah would talk during these visits, gradually learning about each other. Delilah told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, her parents who had died of influenza when she was 16, her years working for her aunt's dressmaking business. "I was good at it," she said one afternoon as they sat on Martha's porch, watching the mountains turn gold in the evening light. "But my aunt had 3 daughters of her own, and when they grew old enough to help in the shop, there was less need for me. I was taking up space, eating food that could go to her girls." She never said it directly, but I felt it. When I saw Samuel's advertisement in the paper, it seemed like a chance for something different. "You regret coming?" Blake asked. Delilah considered the question. "I thought I would. When Sheriff Daniels told me Samuel was dead, I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened. But now I do not know. This land is beautiful. The sky is bigger than anything I ever imagined, and the people I have met have been kind. You have not been to town much yet, Blake said. That is where you would face the most questions and gossip. I am not afraid of gossip, Delilah said, surprising herself with the truth of it. I have dealt with worse. Blake smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. You are tougher than you look, Miss Porter. Delilah, she said. If we are going to be friends, you should call me Delilah. Delilah, he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. 3 weeks passed. Delilah accompanied Blake to town one Saturday for supplies. Canon City was busier than it had been when she arrived, with ranchers and miners coming in for the weekend. Blake introduced her to the shopkeepers and several ranch families, explaining the situation simply and honestly. Most people were sympathetic. A few women looked at her with speculation, clearly wondering what would happen between her and Blake. One older woman, Mrs. Peterson, was more direct. "So will you be marrying Blake Morgan, then?" she asked as Delilah examined fabric in the general store. "I have not decided," Delilah said calmly. "I am staying with Mrs. Henley and getting to know the area. Seems to me a woman in your position should not be too particular," Mrs. Peterson said with a sniff. "Blake Morgan is a good catch. You could do far worse." "I could also do far better by taking my time and making a wise decision," Delilah replied, keeping her voice pleasant but firm. "Rushing into marriage with a stranger is what brought me here in the first place. I do not intend to repeat that mistake." Blake had overheard the exchange from where he stood at the counter. As they loaded supplies into the wagon, he said quietly, "I am sorry about Mrs. Peterson. She means well, but she is a busybody." "I can handle busybodies," Delilah assured him. "They exist everywhere, not just in Colorado." On the way back to Martha's place, Blake was quieter than usual. Finally, he pulled the wagon to a stop at a spot where the road overlooked a wide valley. The ranch buildings were visible in the distance, and beyond them, the mountains rose against the brilliant blue sky. "I need to tell you something," Blake said, not looking at her. "And I want you to hear it from me before you hear it from someone else in town." Delilah felt a flutter of apprehension. "What is it?" "Samuel was not just my brother. He was my half-brother. We had different mothers. My mother was a Cheyenne woman named Morning Star. She and my father were together for 6 years before she died of fever. I was 4 years old. Later, my father married a white woman from Denver, and she gave him Samuel." He finally turned to look at her, and Delilah saw wariness in his eyes, as if he expected rejection or disgust. "My mother's people taught me their ways until she died," he continued. "I still have connections with them, still follow some of the teachings she passed to me. Samuel never minded, and neither did our father before he died. But some folks in town, well, they look at me differently when they know." Delilah absorbed this information. She had seen few native people since arriving in Colorado, but she knew the tensions that existed, the wars that had been fought and were still being fought in various territories. "Does this change how you see me?" Blake asked, his voice carefully neutral. "It helps me understand you better," Delilah said slowly. "You are a man with heritage from 2 worlds. That must be complicated sometimes." "It is," Blake admitted. "I look more white than native so I can pass in town, run the ranch without too much trouble, but inside I feel torn sometimes. My mother's people are being pushed out of their lands, forced onto reservations. Meanwhile, I am raising cattle and claiming land that used to be their hunting grounds." "Is that why you keep to yourself? Why Samuel did the business dealings in town?" Blake nodded. "Samuel understood. He protected me in his way. Now he is gone, and I have to figure out how to manage both the ranch and the relationships in town on my own. Delilah reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. Thank you for telling me. I know that took courage. Blake looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability she had not seen before. I needed you to know. Before you make any decisions about staying or going, you should know who I really am. I think I am starting to understand who you are, Delilah said softly. And what I see is a good man trying to honor his brother's memory and do right by a stranger who fell into his life unexpectedly. They sat there for a long moment, hands touching, looking out at the valley. Delilah felt something unfurling inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. Over the next few weeks, Blake began teaching Delilah to ride. He brought over a gentle mare named Juniper and spent patient hours showing her how to sit properly, how to hold the reins, how to communicate with the horse through subtle shifts of weight and pressure. You are doing well, he said one afternoon as Delilah trotted in a circle in Martha's pasture. Better than I expected for someone from the city. I am tougher than I look, remember? Delilah called back, grinning as she brought Juniper to a smooth stop. Blake's face broke into that transformative smile. I am starting to see that. Martha watched these lessons from her porch, a knowing look in her old eyes. One evening, as she and Delilah prepared supper, she said, "That boy is falling in love with you." Delilah nearly dropped the knife she was using to slice bread. What? No, he is just being kind. Honoring his brother's commitment. I have lived 67 years on this earth, child. I know what I see. The way he looks at you when you are not paying attention, the way he finds excuses to come by every day, the patience he shows teaching you to ride. That is not just kindness. That is a man who has found something precious and is trying to protect it. Delilah's heart beat faster. Even if that were true, I do not know how I feel. This whole situation is so strange. I came here to marry his brother. And now his brother is gone, Martha said practically. You are a free woman and Blake is a free man. What you had planned before does not matter anymore. What matters is what you feel now. That night, Delilah lay awake thinking about Martha's words. Did she have feelings for Blake? She enjoyed his company, looked forward to his visits, felt safe when he was near. The thought of leaving Colorado and never seeing him again created an ache in her chest. But was that love, or just appreciation for his kindness in a difficult situation? May arrived with warmer weather and wildflowers blooming across the valley. Blake invited Delilah to spend a day at the ranch, helping with tasks that needed doing and seeing more of the operation. She arrived in the morning to find Blake working with a young black stallion in the corral. The horse was magnificent, all power and spirit, and Blake moved around him with calm confidence. He is beautiful, Delilah said, leaning on the fence. He is also stubborn and half wild, Blake replied, not taking his eyes off the horse. I am trying to gentle him enough to saddle train, but it is slow going. Delilah watched, fascinated, as Blake worked with the stallion. He never raised his voice, never showed frustration, just maintained a steady, patient presence until the horse gradually began to relax. After an hour, Blake led the stallion back to the barn and emerged wiping sweat from his forehead. Ready to learn how to make bread? You want me to teach you to make bread? I want you to teach me to make bread that does not taste like boot leather, Blake said with a self-deprecating grin. I survive on stew and beans and the occasional chicken when I can catch one. Samuel used to do most of the cooking. They spent the afternoon in the ranch kitchen, Delilah showing Blake how to mix flour and water and salt, how to knead the dough until it was smooth and elastic, how to let it rise and shape it into loaves. You have to be patient with it, she explained, her hands working the dough with practiced ease. "Like with your horse. You cannot rush it or force it." Blake tried to copy her movements, his large, calloused hands clumsy with the unfamiliar task. Delilah laughed at his frustrated expression. "Here," she said, moving to stand beside him. She placed her hands over his, guiding the motion. "Like this, see? Push down and forward, then fold it back." Blake went very still. They were standing close, her body beside his, their hands moving together in the rhythmic motion of kneading bread. Delilah could feel the warmth of him, smell the clean scent of soap and sun-dried cotton. "Delilah," he said softly. She looked up and found his face close to hers, his blue eyes searching her expression. Her breath caught in her throat. "I need to tell you something," Blake said. "These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has meant more to me than I can easily put into words. When I first suggested you might marry me instead of Samuel, it was a practical thought, a solution to a problem. But now, Delilah whispered. "Now I find myself hoping you will choose to stay, not because it is practical, but because you want to. Because maybe you feel something of what I am starting to feel." Delilah's heart hammered against her ribs. "And what are you feeling?" Blake lifted one hand, dusted with flour, and gently touched her cheek. "I think I am falling in love with you. I did not plan it, did not expect it, but there it is." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes broke through the last of Delilah's uncertainty. She realized with stunning clarity that she felt the same way. Somewhere between that first awkward meeting and this flower-dusted moment, she had fallen for this quiet, honorable man with his complicated heritage and his patient strength. "I feel it too," she admitted. "I did not want to. I told myself it was too soon, too strange, but I cannot help what my heart is doing." Blake smiled, slow and wondering. "So you will stay? You will marry me?" "I will stay," Delilah said. "But Blake, I need to say something too. I do not want to marry you right away. Can we court properly first? Get to know each other as people do when they are falling in love, not as strangers making a practical arrangement." "We can take all the time you need," Blake said. "I told you before, I will wait, and I meant it." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and pressed his lips gently to hers. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, tasting of flower dust and promise. When they pulled apart, Delilah felt like she was glowing from the inside out. "The bread is going to be terrible if we do not finish kneading it," she said breathlessly. Blake laughed, a sound of pure joy that filled the kitchen. "Then we had better focus, because I really do want to learn to make decent bread." They spent the rest of the afternoon cooking together, talking and laughing with the easy comfort of people who had found something rare and worth protecting. The bread came out surprisingly well, golden and fragrant, and they ate it warm with butter while sitting on the front porch and watching the sun set behind the mountains. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Delilah had imagined. Blake was not a man of flowery words or grand gestures, but he showed his growing love in 100 small ways. He brought her wildflowers from the meadows, taught her to identify bird calls, carved her a beautiful hair comb from pine wood during long evenings. Delilah, in turn, began to feel more integrated into the life of the ranch. She helped Blake with lighter tasks, learned to milk the cow, tended a vegetable garden that sprang up with surprising vigor in the Colorado soil. Martha's health improved with Delilah's help, and the older woman delighted in watching the romance blossom. "I told you that boy was falling in love," she said one evening, watching Blake ride up the path to visit. "And you are just as far gone, I can see it in your eyes. Is it always this way?" Delilah asked, "This feeling like the world is brighter when he is near?" "When it is real love, yes," Martha said with satisfaction. "You have found something good, Delilah. Do not let fear or propriety make you wait too long to claim it. In June, Blake took Delilah to meet some of his mother's relatives who lived on a small piece of land about 20 miles from Canon City. It was a mixed group, some full-blood Cheyenne, some mixed like Blake, all trying to maintain their traditions while navigating an increasingly hostile world. Blake's uncle, a weathered man named Two Horses, embraced Blake warmly and studied Delilah with keen dark eyes. "So this is the woman who has captured my nephew's heart," he said in accented but clear English. "Welcome." They spent the day with Blake's extended family, sharing a meal, listening to stories. Delilah was struck by their warmth, their resilience in the face of hardship. Blake's cousin, a young woman named Sarah who had a white father and Cheyenne mother, took Delilah aside at one point. "Blake has been alone for a long time," Sarah said. "After his brother died, we worried he would close himself off completely, but you have brought light back into his eyes. Thank you for that." "I think he brought light into mine too," Delilah replied. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, Blake was quiet. Finally, he said, "My mother's people are struggling. The reservation they are being pushed toward is barren land. The government keeps breaking promises. I send them what help I can, cattle sometimes, money when I have extra. But it is never enough. It must be hard," Delilah said softly, "loving people from two worlds that are at war with each other." "Samuel understood that," Blake said. "He never judged me for helping my mother's family. He would go with me sometimes, help deliver cattle to the reservation. I need you to understand, if you marry me, that is part of who I am, part of what we would be doing with the ranch." "I understand," Delilah said, "and I think it is admirable. Your mother's people are your family. Of course you should help them." Blake reached over and took her hand. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined as the stars emerged overhead. By July, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that she wanted to marry Blake Morgan. They had spent nearly 3 months getting to know each other, and her initial attraction had deepened into profound love. She loved his quiet strength, his honor, his gentleness with animals and people. She loved the way he listened when she talked, really listened, as if her words mattered. She loved his laugh, rare but wonderful when it came. She loved the way he touched her, with reverence and restrained passion, always respectful of propriety but making clear his desire. One evening in late July, as they sat by the creek that ran through the ranch property, Delilah said, "I am ready." Blake looked over at her. "Ready for what?" "To marry you, to make this official. I have had time to be certain, and I am certain. I love you, Blake Morgan. I want to be your wife." Joy blazed across Blake's face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Are you sure? Absolutely sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything," Delilah said. Blake drew back and looked into her eyes. "Then I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small turquoise stone. "This was my mother's," he said. "The only thing of hers I still have. My father gave it to her when they pledged themselves to each other. I would be honored if you would wear it." Tears filled Delilah's eyes as Blake slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the turquoise gleaming against her skin. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "I will treasure it always." Blake kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Delilah felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. She was no longer Delilah Porter, orphaned seamstress from Philadelphia. She was Delilah, beloved of Blake Morgan, about to begin a new life in the Colorado Territory. They were married in August, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Canon City. Martha stood with Delilah, and Blake's friend Tom Rollins, a neighboring rancher, stood with Blake. Several of Blake's relatives from his mother's side made the journey to attend. mixing with the ranchers and townspeople in an uncommon display of unity. Delilah wore a dress she had made herself from cream-colored silk, the best fabric available in Canon City's general store. She had embroidered tiny wildflowers around the neckline and hem, the same wildflowers that Blake had brought her during their courtship. As she walked down the aisle toward where Blake waited, tall and handsome in his best suit, Delilah felt overwhelming gratitude for the strange series of events that had brought her here. She had come to Colorado to marry Samuel Morgan, a man she had never met. Instead, she was marrying Blake, a man she had come to know and love deeply. The minister, a kind older man named Reverend Thompson, led them through their vows. When Blake said, "I do," his voice was strong and sure. When Delilah said the same, she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson said. "You may kiss your bride." Blake cupped Delilah's face gently in his hands and kissed her, soft and sweet, a promise of love and devotion. The small congregation erupted in applause. The reception was held at Tom Rollins' ranch, which had more space than Blake and Delilah's place. Tables were set up under the trees, laden with food that the women of the community had prepared. There was music, a fiddle player who knew a seemingly endless supply of reels and waltzes. Blake danced with Delilah, his movements surprisingly graceful for a man more used to working with cattle than dancing. "You are full of surprises," Delilah said as he spun her through a waltz. "My mother taught me," Blake said. "She loved dancing. She would dance for my father in the evenings, traditional dances of her people. Then she would make him teach her white people's dances, and they would waltz around our little cabin. It is one of my clearest memories of her." Delilah's heart squeezed at the image. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Blake said. "I wish you could have met her. I think she would have loved you." As the sun set and the celebration continued, Blake leaned close and whispered, "Are you ready to go home? Home." The word sent a thrill through Delilah. Yes, she was ready. They said their goodbyes, accepted final congratulations and well wishes, and climbed into the wagon. Martha had agreed to stay with friends in town for a few days, giving the newlyweds privacy. The ranch would be theirs alone. The ride back was filled with anticipation. Blake kept one arm around Delilah, and she leaned into his warmth, watching the stars emerge in the vast Colorado sky. When they reached the ranch, Blake pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to Delilah. "I know we have been here many times," he said, "but tonight is different. Tonight I am bringing you home as my wife." He climbed down and came around to her side, but instead of helping her down, he swept her up into his arms. "Blake," she laughed, holding onto his shoulders. "What are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold?" he said. "It is tradition." He carried her into the house, kicking the door shut behind them. The interior was dim, lit only by moonlight streaming through the windows. Blake set Delilah down gently, but did not release her. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving that to you." "I love you too," Delilah replied, reaching up to touch his face. "Show me." Blake kissed her then, not gently but with unleashed passion, and Delilah responded with equal fervor. They made their way upstairs, shedding clothes, learning each other with hands and lips, whispering words of love and desire. That night, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, becoming husband and wife in truth. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed that had once been prepared for Samuel's mail-order bride, now blessed by the love between Blake and Delilah. "I used to dream of love," Delilah whispered in the darkness, her head on Blake's chest. "But this is better than anything I imagined." Blake kissed the top of her head. "You are my dream come true, Delilah, the one I did not even know I was allowed to have." The months that followed were filled with the hard work of ranching and the joy of building a life together. Delilah threw herself into making the house a home, sewing curtains, planting flowers around the porch, organizing the kitchen until it ran with efficiency. She learned to cook on the wood stove, adapting recipes she knew from Philadelphia to the ingredients available in Colorado. Blake taught her more about ranching, letting her help with tasks like branding calves, mending fences, and even helping deliver a foal when one of their mares gave birth. Delilah discovered a deep satisfaction in the physical labor, in seeing the results of her work manifested in a well-run household and a thriving ranch. Their love deepened with each passing day. They learned each other's moods and habits, fought occasionally over small things but always made peace before sleeping, and found countless ways to show affection. Blake would leave small gifts where Delilah would find them. Wildflowers on her pillow, a smooth stone from the creek, a bird's nest that had fallen intact from a tree. Delilah would pack special treats in Blake's saddlebag when he rode out to check the cattle, or rub his sore shoulders after long days of hard work. In the fall, they traveled again to visit Blake's mother's family, bringing supplies and 2 young steers. The situation on the reservation had worsened, with promises of government aid failing to materialize and winter approaching. 2 horses pulled Blake aside during the visit. "Your help means more than you know," he said in his native language, which Blake translated quietly for Delilah later. "But be careful. There are white men who would not look kindly on you helping Indians even if they are your family." "I will be careful," Blake promised, "but I will not abandon my people." On the ride home, Blake was troubled. "There may come a time when helping my mother's family causes problems for us," he said to Delilah. "People in town might take issue with it. It could affect the ranch business." "Then we will deal with it," Delilah said firmly. "Your family is my family now. I stand with you in this, whatever comes." Blake looked at her with such love and gratitude that it took her breath away. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured. "I think we both got lucky," Delilah replied. "In the strangest way possible, winter came to Colorado with dramatic swiftness. The mountains turned white, and the temperature plummeted. Blake worked hard to ensure the cattle had shelter and feed, riding out in freezing conditions to check on the herds. Delilah worried about him on these cold days, and her relief when he returned safely each evening was palpable. They spent long winter evenings by the fire, Blake carving or mending tack while Delilah sewed or read aloud from books she had brought from Philadelphia. Sometimes they would simply talk, sharing stories from their childhoods, their dreams for the future, their thoughts on everything from politics to philosophy. "I never thought I could be this happy," Delilah said one snowy evening, curled against Blake's side on the couch. "When I left Philadelphia, I was so uncertain, scared really, though I tried not to show it." "I was scared too," Blake admitted. "When Samuel died, I thought I had lost my chance at having a real family, a partner in life. The idea of asking you to marry me seemed ridiculous, but I had to try." "And I am so glad you did," Delilah said, tilting her face up to kiss him. "I cannot imagine my life without you now." In January, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She waited a few weeks to be certain, then told Blake one morning over breakfast. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, watching his face. Blake went perfectly still, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. Then a smile broke across his face like sunrise. "Truly, we are going to have a child." "In late summer, I think," Delilah said, laughing as Blake jumped up and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen. "Careful," she protested, still laughing. "You will make me dizzy." Blake set her down but kept his arms around her, his hands moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child," he said wonderingly. "A baby. Delilah, I am so happy I could burst." "I am happy too," Delilah said, "and a little scared, but mostly happy." Blake became even more protective than usual as Delilah's pregnancy progressed. He insisted she not do heavy work, hired a young man from town to help with ranch chores, and fussed over her diet and rest. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Delilah protested when Blake tried to forbid her from riding Juniper. "I know," Blake said, "but humor me, please. I could not bear it if something happened to you or the baby." Delilah softened at the genuine worry in his eyes. "All right, I will be careful. But you have to stop hovering quite so much. I need to be able to breathe." They compromised, finding a balance between Blake's protectiveness and Delilah's independence. As spring came and her belly swelled, Delilah felt overwhelmingly grateful for the life growing inside her, for the good man who hovered nearby with worried eyes and gentle hands, for this home they had built together from the ashes of tragedy. In April, exactly 1 year after Delilah had first arrived in Canon City, they stood together on the porch watching the sunset. Delilah's hand rested on her pregnant belly, and Blake's arm was around her shoulders. "A year ago today, I thought my life was over," Delilah said quietly. "I was going to marry a stranger, live in a place I had never seen, become someone I was not sure I could be." "And now?" Blake asked. "Now I cannot imagine being anywhere else with anyone else. You gave me time when you could have rushed me. You gave me choices when you could have taken advantage. You let me fall in love with you naturally, without pressure or expectations. That gift of patience and respect is something I will treasure all my life." Blake kissed her temple. "You were worth waiting for. You are worth everything." Their son was born in late August, a year and 2 weeks after their wedding. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Martha and a midwife from town named Mrs. Carlson. Blake waited downstairs, pacing the floor, jumping at every sound. Finally, as dawn broke, the sound of a baby's cry filled the house. Moments later, Martha appeared at the top of the stairs, her wrinkled face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son," she called down, "and Delilah is asking for you." Blake took the stairs 3 at a time. In the bedroom, Delilah lay propped against pillows, exhausted but glowing. In her arms was a tiny bundle, red-faced and squalling. "Meet your son," she said softly as Blake approached on unsteady legs. Blake sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the baby with wonder. The infant had dark hair and a scrunched face, one tiny fist waving in the air. "He is perfect," Blake whispered, touching one finger to the baby's impossibly small hand. Instantly, the tiny fist closed around his finger, gripping with surprising strength. "He is strong," Delilah said. "Like his father." "What should we name him?" Blake asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son's face, Delilah said, "What about Benjamin, Benjamin Morgan? It means son of the right hand, a blessing." "Benjamin," Blake repeated, testing the name. "Benjamin Samuel Morgan, after my brother." Tears filled Delilah's eyes. "That is perfect." Little Benjamin proved to be a healthy, vigorous baby with a strong set of lungs. Blake was a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring the baby to Delilah for feeding, changing diapers with increasing skill, and walking the floor with Benjamin against his shoulder when the baby was fussy. "You are a natural," Delilah said one evening, watching Blake rock their son. "I just remember how my father was with Samuel when he was little," Blake said. "Patient and gentle. I want to be that kind of father." "You already are," Delilah assured him. Life on the ranch found a new rhythm with a baby in the house. It was harder in some ways, with less sleep and more demands on their time. But it was also richer, filled with the joy of watching Benjamin grow and learn, of seeing Blake's face light up at his son's first smile, of experiencing the bone-deep satisfaction of building a family together. When Benjamin was 6 months old, Blake took Delilah and the baby to visit his mother's family. 2 Horses was particularly taken with the baby, holding him carefully and speaking to him in Cheyenne. "He has his grandmother's eyes," 2 Horses said to Blake. "Morning Star would have loved him." Blake's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "I wish she could have met him, and Samuel too. They see him," 2 Horses said with certainty. "They watch from the spirit world and they are proud. The years that followed were good ones." The ranch prospered, Benjamin grew strong and healthy, and Blake and Delilah's love continued to deepen. They had their challenges, certainly. There were drought years when the grass turned brown and they worried about the cattle. There were harsh winters when they burned through their wood supply and huddled close for warmth. There were tense moments in town when someone would make a comment about Blake's heritage, and Delilah would have to hold him back from responding with his fists. But through it all, they had each other. They had the home they had built together, the family they were raising, the community of friends and relatives who supported them. When Benjamin was 3 years old, Delilah gave birth to a daughter. They named her Sarah Rose, after Blake's cousin, and the wild roses that bloomed each summer around the ranch. Sarah was a quieter baby than Benjamin had been, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's blue eyes. Blake adored his daughter, carrying her everywhere, singing to her in both English and the Cheyenne his mother had taught him. Benjamin, at 3, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. "Gentle," Delilah would remind him as he patted Sarah's head with toddler clumsiness. "She is very small." "I am gentle," Benjamin would insist, then proceed to give his sister a kiss that was more of a collision. Martha, now in her 70s, was still healthy enough to visit regularly. She had moved into a smaller place in town, but came out to the ranch several times a month to see the children, and help Delilah with preserving food and other tasks. "You have built a beautiful life," Martha said to Delilah one afternoon as they watched Blake and Benjamin working together in the corral, the little boy trying to copy his father's movements. "I never expected this," Delilah said, bouncing baby Sarah on her hip. "When I answered Samuel's advertisement, I thought I was agreeing to a practical arrangement. I never imagined I would find this kind of love, this kind of happiness. The best things in life are usually the ones we do not expect," Martha said wisely. Blake took a terrible situation and turned it into something beautiful by being patient, by waiting for you to be ready. That is the mark of a good man. "He told me the day we met that he would wait," Delilah remembered, "and he kept that promise. He gave me time to heal, to adjust, to fall in love at my own pace. I think that is why our marriage is so strong. It was built on respect and friendship first, with love growing naturally from that foundation." On their 5th anniversary, Blake surprised Delilah with a gift. It was a wooden box, beautifully carved, and inside was a collection of letters. "These are all the letters Samuel sent you," Blake explained. "I found them among his things after he died. I thought you might want them, to remember the man whose dream brought you here." Delilah read through the letters that evening while Blake put the children to bed. They were kind letters, optimistic, written by a man who hoped to build a good life with a woman he had never met. At the end was one final letter, apparently written just days before Samuel's death, but never sent. In it, Samuel wrote about his excitement for Delilah's impending arrival, his nervousness about meeting her, his hope that they could build a partnership based on respect and mutual support. He wrote about Blake, praising his brother's character and work ethic. The final line read, "If anything should happen to me before you arrive, know that you will be in good hands. Blake is the best man I know, and he will do right by you." Tears streamed down Delilah's face as she finished reading. She carried the letter upstairs to where Blake was waiting. "He knew," she said, showing Blake the final letter. "Somehow Samuel knew. He trusted you to take care of me." Blake read the letter, his own eyes growing damp. "I miss him," he said quietly. "I wish he could see what we have built, meet his niece and nephew." "I think he does see it," Delilah said, echoing Two Horses' words from years before. "And I think he approves." They held each other that night, mourning the man whose death had brought them together, grateful for the life they had built from that tragedy. Years continued to pass. Benjamin grew into a capable boy who loved working with his father, learning ranching skills with enthusiasm. Sarah was more interested in books and drawing, traits she inherited from her mother. When Benjamin was 8 and Sarah was 5, Delilah gave birth to another son, whom they named Daniel. Blake was 40 by then, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples. Delilah was 31, with laugh lines around her eyes from years of smiling. They had weathered challenges together, celebrated triumphs, and built something lasting. The ranch had expanded over the years. They now ran several hundred head of cattle, employed 2 full-time ranch hands, and had become respected members of the community. Blake had overcome the worst of the prejudice against his mixed heritage through sheer competence and integrity. He was known as a fair employer, an honest dealer, and a devoted family man. He continued to help his mother's people when he could, though the situation for native tribes had grown even more difficult over the years. 2 horses had died the previous winter, and Blake had mourned deeply. But he maintained connections with his cousin Sarah and other relatives, ensuring that part of his heritage was not lost. One summer evening when Benjamin was 12, Sarah was 9, and Daniel was 4, the family sat together on the front porch after supper. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Blake took Delilah's hand, raising it to his lips. "Do you ever think about that day when you first arrived?" he asked. "When the sheriff told you Samuel was dead and your entire plan had fallen apart?" "I think about it sometimes," Delilah said. "I was so scared and uncertain I felt like my life was ending." "Instead, it was beginning," Blake said. "It was," Delilah agreed. "If Samuel had lived, I might have had a good life. He seemed like a kind man, but it would not have been this. It would not have been the love we have, the family we have built." Blake was quiet for a moment, watching their children play. "I said I would wait," he finally said. "That day in the kitchen, when I told you I was falling in love with you, I said I would wait for you to be ready. It was the truest thing I ever said. I would have waited forever if that was what you needed." "I know," Delilah said softly. "That is why I fell in love with you, because you gave me the gift of time and choice. You treated me with respect and patience when you could have taken advantage. You showed me what real love looks like." "You showed me the same thing," Blake said. "You could have looked down on me for my heritage. You could have judged my connection to my mother's people. Instead, you embraced all of who I am. You made me feel whole for the first time in my life." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the mountains turn gold in the setting sun. Their children's voices rang out in joy, and inside the house, the life they had built together waited warm and secure. Years later, when Benjamin was preparing to take over the ranch and both girls were grown, Blake and Delilah would sit on that same porch, older but still deeply in love. They would tell their grandchildren the story of how they met, how a tragedy became a blessing, how patience and respect had bloomed into enduring love. "Your grandfather told me he would wait," Delilah would say, her hand still fitting perfectly in Blake's despite the years. "And he kept that promise. That is how I knew I could trust him with my heart. Your grandmother chose me, Blake would add, his voice still warm with wonder even after decades of marriage. When she could have gone back east, when she could have chosen safety over uncertainty, she chose me. That choice changed everything. But on this particular evening, with their children still young and so many years ahead of them, Blake and Delilah simply sat together, grateful for the strange journey that had brought them here, for the love that had grown from the most unlikely beginnings, for the family they continued to build together. The moon rose over the Colorado mountains, bright and full, casting silver light across the ranch. Inside the house, the room that had once been prepared for Samuel's mail-order bride was now filled with the sound of children sleeping, the evidence of love and life continuing. And on the porch, Blake Morgan and Delilah Morgan sat hand in hand, two people who had found each other through tragedy and built something beautiful through patience, respect, and abiding love. The Wild West could be harsh and unforgiving, but it could also be the setting for the most extraordinary love stories. This was one of them, a tale of a woman sent to marry a stranger's brother, and the cowboy who said, "Choose me instead, I will wait," then proved himself worthy of that choice every single day for the rest of their lives. Their love story would become part of the ranch's history, told to children and grandchildren. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that true love is built not on grand gestures but on daily choices to honor, respect, and cherish the person you have chosen to walk through life beside. As the stars emerged one by one in the vast Colorado sky, Blake leaned over and kissed his wife, soft and sweet, a kiss that held all the love of their years together and the promise of all the years yet to come. Delilah kissed him back, her heart full of gratitude for the day she had stepped off that stagecoach into an uncertain future, and for the patient, honorable man who had given her the time and space to choose him freely. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, built on a foundation of respect and patience, and destined to last forever. And it all began with a tragedy, a proposal, and a simple promise. "I will wait."